Welcome. This is the Help Tantrumming Kids Regulate webinar. My name is Jodie Thornton, and I'd like to start tonight with an acknowledgement of country. So I am joining you from a place that you might know as Canberra in Australia. And here in Australia, we have a number of First Nations that existed prior to the colonisation of this land. And so where I am joining the call from is called Ngunnawal and Ngambri country. And so I just wanted to acknowledge that, or to say that I acknowledge the Ngunnawal and Ngambri peoples as the custodians of the lands, waterways, and skies from where I'm joining you today. I pay respect to the past and present Ngunnawal and Ngambri elders, and there's a typo, so that's great with your double past and present. And particularly if you are on this continent, but maybe even if you are somewhere else, you might like to check out the world of Children's Ground at childrensground.org.au. That organisation is Aboriginal led, and in that organisation, they're looking at how do we get more culturally appropriate education and in the First Nations child's original language. And so it's a really important initiative to work on improving the educational rates among First Nations children, but particularly that it's culturally appropriate education. So if you're interested in that kind of initiative, you might like to check out the website and consider donating as well. So about me. So my name's Jodie Thornton. I have 4 children who are 27, 24, 12, and 10. And one granddaughter who has just turned 4. We are a blended family. So my 27 and 24-year-olds are my husband's children from his first marriage. I met him when the kids were 5 and 8, and then we had 2 together. And then our eldest has now had a baby, so is now our granddaughter, who is just gorgeous. She's at 4-year-old stage and just delightful. So one of the things that I learned from being in a blended family was actually about the fact that there's always another way to achieve the same parenting outcome. So for me, being a step parent, it wasn't actually always appropriate for me to be the person who made decisions about what was happening for the children. Like I was and still am, very, very active step parent and very involved step parent. But at the same time, their mother and father needed to make the decisions, key important parenting decisions, right? And so then for me, looking at the parts of parenting that I wanted to do for the older children, I had to look at what would that look like? How would I achieve that goal when it was potentially only me that was working on that angle, right? And so things like their emotional regulation or their communication skills, when our parenting wasn't all on the same page, how would I be able to help them build those skills when I wasn't able to achieve every adult or every parent in their life is on the same page? And so that's part of what I learned through that process, is that there's always another way to achieve the same goal, always. So no matter what kind of privileges you do or don't have access to, or the circumstances that you're in, we can find a way. And it might not be a way that you might expect, or it might be a way that needs to be quite clever and strategic, but there's always a way. And I just wanted to answer a question: is this suitable for teachers? Absolutely. You may find that as a teacher, you may find that some of the strategies you might not have the time to do them fully because of the fact that you've got multiple children to look after at the same time. But there will be some pieces that you'll be able to implement that will really help. And so today, what we'll be doing today, we'll be looking at how to use your words, tone of voice, and body language to help your child calm down from a tantrum and bring their rational brain back online. We're also going to talk about how to remember to do it in the moment. So I just wanted to point that out, that we will talk about that after we go through the strategies, because it's often a tricky thing, right? We learn a new strategy, but in the moment when everything's happening, particularly when we are also struggling to stay regulated, it's hard to remember the thing that we just learned. And I'm going to give you some steps to be able to make it easier for you to remember it in the moment. We're also going to talk about how to practice implementing the steps we'll talk about tonight so that it becomes your autopilot. So this becomes just your default way of doing things so that even if you're not feeling the best on the particular day, even if things are hard, we're not going to expect perfection and we're not going to expect it to work in every single circumstance, but we don't want this to be something that is only achievable on your best days. We want it to be part of just your basic, this is how you respond when your child is overwhelmed. I'd love to hear from you in the chat box. What is your biggest challenge in supporting your kids through tantrums? And feel free to share as much or as little as you like. I might read some comments out, but I won't read out your name because this session is being recorded and will be emailed out to everybody who registered. So that'll cover both people who are here tonight and also people who couldn't make it. So just so you're aware, I will read out comments, but not names. So if you wanted to share. And while you're doing that, I'll take you through the big 5 most common challenges I hear across parents. So one of the things is that I want them to be able to have their feelings, but their tantrums are so intense and they just go on and on. And that just can't be good for them, right? It's like it's not great for a child to spend so much time in overwhelm. It's not good for them to be overwhelmed, but we do want to make space for the feelings, right? So how do you balance those two things together? Another one is I don't want to invalidate their feelings, but I also don't want to reinforce that they should need to get their way all the time. And this is important because we want to raise kids who are able to be assertive, but who are also able to be considerate and flexible and resilient. And so it's really, this is one of those challenges is like, where is the line of how do we create a circumstance where our children feel validated, but they don't feel like it's critical to their happiness to make sure that they get their way. Another one is that when their reaction is irrational, I struggle to remember that their feelings are still valid. And that's really, really tricky because most of us grew up in families that our feelings weren't validated, particularly the feelings that were intense or the ones that appeared irrational. And so it is really difficult when we're in a stressful situation, which is holding space for a child who's overwhelmed. It is hard to remember that the feelings are still valid, even if they don't seem to make sense on the surface. Another one being, should I handle a meltdown differently to a tantrum? So this the approach that I'm going to take you through tonight will work in either circumstance. You'll see how there's a place where you'll see that if your child is in a meltdown, you'll stop at certain points and not move through to the next steps until they're out of that meltdown. But ultimately, what we're looking at here is how to help a child who's overwhelmed. And even if the tantrum is what some people might call, manipulative, or some people might say they're just trying to get their way, that still, if it appears as a tantrum, they're still in some form of overwhelm. And so what we're going to do tonight will help in either case. The last one that I see most commonly is that I can only hold space for their feelings for so long before I react badly, which then has the parent feeling bad about the impact they're having on the child. Even if they're able to repair, it still feels like I don't want them to have that experience in the first place, right? And I don't want to be the parent that is reacting badly, but also like it is incredibly draining, especially if you're the only gentle adult in your child's life. But even if you're not, it's still, when they're in a tantrum stage, it can be really draining. And particularly if it bumps up against your triggers as well, that can be really, really hard to manage. And so we have one parent who's saying that we have a child who would scream at the top of her lungs. That's so common. And what we do tonight will definitely help with that. And yes, that one challenge is where one child is having a tantrum and the other needs something. It's difficult to manage where my attention needs to go. And I feel bad for the non-tantruming child because we normally need to stop whatever we're doing. And that's part of the impact on the rest of the family, right? Is that it does mean that in order for you to be fully present and holding space for your tantruming child, then that means that you're not as available to the other kids. And it's also tricky for you to decide, like, how do I handle this? My number one thing to say would be the more efficiently you're able to hold space for your child's tantrums, they'll move through it more quickly, which means that you're not unavailable for your other child for as long. And I'll also go at the end of this, at the end of the session, I'll also speak about how to manage that situation where you've got more than one child and one child's not getting the attention that they need at the time. So one question is, why not just wait out the phase, right? For the vast majority of kids, they will grow out of it. Not everybody. I think we probably all know some adults who still do what we might call tantruming. So not every kid will grow out of it, but the vast majority of kids will grow out of a tantrum phase eventually. But I don't want us to wait out the phase unless you need to. So if you're in a situation where you really don't have the time or the emotional energy to make a change, I want you to know this is not urgent. You can get this shift to happen when you do have the time and space to do it. But if you are in a position where you have even a small amount of time or energy to make a change in how you handle your child's tantrums, I don't want you to wait out the phase. And here's why. When they're in a tantrum phase, their emotions are so intense that it actually can be a much easier time to develop their emotional awareness, because they get really strong feedback whether what we're doing is helping their emotions or making them worse or leaving them the same. It's such strong feedback for them because everything's so intense all the time. It's actually a really good time. It's a really fruitful time for developing their awareness. They'll also have shorter and less intense tantrums, which is obviously good for everybody, good for the child, good for you, good for everybody else in the family as well. Now, the younger they are, the easier it is to learn and to hold space for their feelings. So if you're trying to learn how to hold space for your child's feelings when they are much stronger and much taller, when their feelings are about things that are much trickier. So if you imagine a child who's having a tantrum at 3, it might be about the color of the cup. But if a child's having what we might still call a tantrum when they're 12, this can be a really complicated situation with their friendship group or what's going on at school or something else, right? Even worse, if we start when they're adults, being able to hold space for your child when it's a real life, it's a situation that's really going to impact their life. It feels a lot more pressurized as the parent to learn how to do it well, and you feel a lot more pressure to get it perfectly much more quickly. And so if you're in a situation where you're here tonight or you're watching the recording and your child is older, I want you to know today is better than yesterday. Today is better than tomorrow, right? So no matter how old they are, it's never too late. But the quicker we get onto this, the easier it is for you to be able to get really skillful at holding space for their feelings. You'll also have fewer bad reactions. So whether you snap, whether you yell, whether you say things that you wish you hadn't, or even whether like you're able to hold it in, but in holding it in, you're kind of needing to numb your own feelings. You're kind of needing to check out a little bit emotionally. That still means that you're not as attuned to your children. And it also has a big impact on your life, right? So if you know how to help them with their feelings, all of those things happen less often, possibly not at all, depending on your situation. Once you know how to be your child's tantrum whisperer, it's a really amazing experience. Like, to know that no matter how big their feelings are, you know how to help and they know you know how to help. I have to say, it's so beautiful. Like, it's really deeply affirming that you're able to do something that's really valuable for your child, and to know that you know how like that they will grow up knowing that you really can be the safe space for their feelings, no matter how intense they are or no matter how difficult the situation is. It's also the first step on the way to independent regulation. which is really important for children in their own development to learn how to independently regulate their emotions. But it's also really helpful for situations like if they're going to daycare or to school, you're not going to be there to help. So we want them to be regulating, not getting overwhelmed, and we want them to be independently regulating rather than numbing their feelings or dismissing their own feelings in order to cope, right? We don't want to be, we don't want to have them suppressing their feelings when they're away from you. We want them to be able to handle them themselves. This is also important if your partner or your ex, whoever your child's other parent is not on the same page. And it's also important if they spend time with other adults. So babysitters, nannies, grandparents, aunts and uncles, anyone that they spend time with who may not have the same views of parenting as you do, or who may not have the skills, even if they have the same approach as you do. This is so important for your child to be able to do that regulation when you're not there as well. You haven't missed much at all. We've just going through some of the scene setting pieces and we haven't gotten to the strategy pieces yet. So if we want to think first about what causes a tantrum. So when a tantrum happens, is your child has a need come up. So that need could be something like autonomy, or when it's something like sensory, it can be something like comfort. So if it's about like the shirt isn't very comfortable or the tag is irritating them, that can be a comfort need. But it also can be a need for peace if it's more overwhelmed. So some of the sensory difficulties or challenges that some kids can have, whether it's a general sense like sensitivity or whether it's actually something like a sensory processing disorder, the need there that's coming up is still like peace or like to get out of overstimulation, right? So there's still a need that's coming up either way. And the negative feeling that they have, so I put in that in inverted commas because it's what we call a negative feeling. It's a signal to your child that the need is not being met. Now, like reason I put that in quotes is because what we call a positive feeling is just to let us know that our needs are being met. And so we call them negative and positive, but really it's just feedback. It's just information about whether our needs are getting met or not. And so then once they have that negative feeling come up to let them know that their need is not being met, if they then are able to get that need met, the signal is no longer needed, right? So the feeling is no longer needed, so it dissolves, right? It goes away. But if the need is not met, the signal can intensify or it may be added to what I call the bucket. And I have to come up with a different analogy for this because there's the everybody is aware of that, like there's that analogy about like if you're tipping the bucket or filling the bucket. This is not that analogy, it's a separate one. I need to come up with a better one, but I haven't been able to just yet. So what I call the bucket is like where they're putting their unresolved feelings. Now, their bucket can overflow. So if there's one signal that's intense enough to overwhelm the space in the bucket, so one feeling is so intense that it sends them into overwhelm, or if there's many signals that are added to the bucket. So it's one thing after another, and they could be various sizes of, the intensity of the emotion. But ultimately, what we're getting at is that if it's unresolved, they're adding those feelings to the bucket. Now, if the bucket's almost full, it only takes the smallest problem to happen and the bucket will overflow. But even if the bucket is empty, if it's an intense enough emotion, you can still get into the place where they get overwhelmed, right? It's either way. Now, the size of their bucket depends on their personality, their temperament, how rested they are, if they're hungry or thirsty, and even how much change they're going through. There's other factors as well, right? This is, if we think about the bucket as like their capacity to handle unresolved feelings. Now, when the bucket overflows, so this is my emotions have overwhelmed me. That's what the bucket is overflowing. When I'm overwhelmed, it can look like tantrums, which is what we're talking about tonight, but it can also look like repressing emotions or numbness. It could look like fawning or people pleasing. It can look like aggression. it can look like withdrawing or isolating themselves, and it can also look like denying their own needs. And so you can see how out of that list, the easiest one to handle is actually the tantrum, because the tantrum, they're letting us know that they are overwhelmed. Whereas if they're repressing their emotions, you may not even know that that's what's going on. If they're fawning or people pleasing, it's a little easier often to tell that that's happening, but only if you're really attuned and really paying attention. Aggression, yes, they're letting us know in a similar way to the tantrums, but it is harder to handle aggression because it is physically challenging to take care of their, hitting or kicking or biting, whatever they do, or throwing things. And it's also much more difficult if they're doing that to other people, so their friends or siblings or at school. Much harder to manage that than it is to manage a straight tantrum. Withdrawing or isolating themselves, again, like it's a lot trickier, a lot harder to help them to come out of that than it is for a tantrum. And denying their own needs is another one where you might not even know it's happening. There are some times where we can see it happening, but ultimately the easiest one of these is to handle is the tantrum. So we want to make sure that if your child is in a tantrum phase, we want to resolve that in case it shifts into one of those, their overwhelm shifts into one of those other expressions of being overwhelmed, because that then makes it a harder job for you to help them to regulate their emotions and be able to be expressive of the truth. Yeah, so one parent is just saying extreme silliness is a sign of overwhelm. Absolutely true, right? And I would encourage handling the silliness, the extreme silliness, when you know it's because of overwhelm. The strategies we use tonight can help with that as well. So today, what we're focusing on is what to do when the bucket is overflowing, right? So it's basically when they've got unresolved feelings, one or many, and then they're getting overwhelmed. And we've got a comment to say, can the cause of a tantrum also be a need for control? Absolutely. So a need for control can come up in a few different ways. So one is a need, control can be a coping mechanism for any other need, right? So if let's say I feel very socially, I feel very vulnerable when I'm meeting up with new kids. So I'm going to a new room at daycare and I feel very vulnerable socially. I might want to control everything around me so that I feel safe, or so that that vulnerability doesn't feel as intense, right? Control can also be like I I don't yet know how to solve problems in a way that is considerate of other people. So I feel like if I either control the situation or I acquiesce, those are my two choices. So you can see how there's lots of different reasons that control can come up. There's so many more, but it can be a reason, like the coping mechanism is the need for control in most cases. And because that coping mechanism isn't working, because they can't control it for whatever reason, then they end up in a tantrum. Absolutely the case. So our first step when your child gets overwhelmed is safety. So for some of you, the safety aspect won't be necessary because it doesn't come up. But for many kids, we really need to start with the safety aspect first. So the first thing is that the kids are safe from themselves. So for some children, we end up with them hurting themselves in some way. So it might be hitting themselves. It might be, I've heard of children who would bang their heads on the floor or the wall. They might be doing something that's unsafe, like even in that extreme silliness example, they could be jumping off of the couch, or they could be putting themselves into unsafe situations. This is what we want to be thinking about, is how do we keep them safe from themselves during a tantrum? We also want to make sure that kids are safe from each other. So if one kid is tantruming and the other one is, so let's say you've got two siblings, one kid is tantruming, one is not, we want to make sure the tantruming kid isn't lashing out. We also want to make sure that the non-tantruming kid isn't lashing out, because they get very uncomfortable when a child is overwhelmed around them, right? Very I was going to say common. I'm not sure that it's common, but it happens a lot where the child who's not tantruming wants the tantruming to stop and will lash out, right? So we want to be focused on that as well. We want to make sure that the kids are safe from our emotional overwhelm. So we want to make sure that if we need to take a break, so long as we can do so and keep the kids safe, we want to do that. If that means going to the next room, if that means waiting and not helping straight away, that's all appropriate because our emotional overwhelm also impacts them. So we want to have those strategies in place to be able to deal with it. Now, the biggest thing I'd say with our emotional overwhelm is once you have the skills to help them regulate more quickly, that will become less of an issue. For some parents, once you have the skills, it just doesn't come up anymore. For other parents, you still have that emotional overwhelm come up, but it's much less of an issue than when you didn't have the skills. And we also want to make sure that important things are safe. So, as an example, if a small child, when they're overwhelmed, they start ripping up books that are, important, family resources, we want to make sure that they're not doing that or they're not throwing things at the television or, whatever the important things are, we want to make sure that they're not hurting those things. So what that might involve or how we want to do that. I'm just going to check if I go into that note. We've got finish that onto this slide. So what that looks like is we want to use the minimum amount of force, and we call it protective force, to be able to keep them safe. So for example, if your child is trying to hit their sibling while they're in a tantrum, you might want to put a cushion between them. You might want to put your hands between them. You might need to hold your child's wrists. You might need to physically remove them from each other. What we want to do is make sure we're using the minimum amount of physical protective force in order to keep them safe. So some parents, for example, will do bear hugs to hold their arms still and like have their legs at an angle where it's not going to hurt the parent. If that is the minimum amount of force that will keep everybody safe, then yes, do that. It's not my first port of call unless you already know that everything below that, everything less with less force than that doesn't work. But as I say, whatever the minimum amount of force is. And so one parent was saying that my child was physically harmed at school with serious injuries by bullies. A 4-year-old, that's so horrible. Moved to school, but now presenting behavioral issues at school. Yeah, biting, kicking staff. How do I get him to speak more and stop this behavior? So what we're talking about tonight will start to help with that. Particularly if he's having any kind of overwhelm at home. If he's not having any overwhelm at home, then we would look at some other ways to help with that because it's tricky if it's only happening at school when you're not there. But that is something we can address. But what we do tonight, depending on your situation, may or may not get to the root of that. But we can talk about, so if it's only at school, I will talk about that at the end. I'm just going to write that down because that is something that we would need to take a little bit of a different approach. Right, so now once everybody's safe, our next step is to find what I call the sweet spot. So we want to get close, but only as close as your child is comfortable with, to feel like they recognize that you're there to support them, but that you're not so close that you're agitating them further, right? So all kids will have a standard range of personal space that they like to have when they're overwhelmed, but it can change from day to day, tantrum to tantrum. So my now 12-year-old, when she was a toddler and was having tantrums, she needed about 1 meter to 1.5 meters of space between us as her standard. And then sometimes it was a little more or a little less, depending on what was happening. My now 10-year-old, when she was a toddler having tantrums, she would want to be like, I think she would want to occupy my skin if she could. Like, she really wanted to be in my lap and like really physically connected. And that was just their standard, but it does change day to day, tantrum to tantrum. So once you get to know where it is that you're close enough to know that you're there to help, but far enough that you're not agitating them, wherever that spot is, you want to go to that spot as your default. And then tantrum to tantrum, you're just going to look at, does it feel like I'm so close that I'm agitating them? Like the typical is like when they say to you, go away, right? But also there's other times when you really pay attention to their body language, you can see if they're actually getting more agitated by your presence or not. And then you might get closer or further away just to make sure that you're in that space where you're there to help. Now, uh, for our body language, our first thing, once we get into that sweet spot, we want to relax your body language. So I want you to choose the three places in your body that hold the most tension. So for me, it's my jaw. I think it's called the trapezoid muscles at the top of and the back of my shoulder. I'm like, the more tension I'm holding, the closer my shoulders are to my ears, and in my hands. So it'll either be tense or my hands will not be in a relaxed place. And the reason I'm choosing three places is to get you into the focus of, I'm here to send the signal that I'm not here to fix or change their feelings, but I'm here to help. And it gives you a chance to remind yourself of the same. We really want to, and you may be in the position where you remember to check your body language and everything's already fine. That's great. But you've had a moment to remind yourself that I'm not here to control this or fix it or change it. I'm just here to help my child regulate. So if you just notice, what are those three places in your body that hold the most tension? Now, most people, when I ask, they can tell me the places in their body that are holding the most tension. But if you don't know, the next time your child has a tantrum, just pay attention. Like, where's the most tension in my body? What are three places that I can relax in that moment? The next thing we want to do is reflect. So we're going to use your words to reflect what you understand of what's going on for them. So what we want to be careful here is that we're not telling them what you want them to see, but what they see. So for example, it might be you want them to understand that it's not their turn, right? But what we want to reflect is what they are thinking, right? I want a turn. And so if you're not sure what the underlying feelings and needs are, you might just say you really want it to be your turn. But if you can include feelings and needs, it's more effective. So it might, if it's not their turn, the feelings and needs might be, it's you're so frustrated because it's taking so long and it's hard to wait, right? Or it might be, you're so angry because you wanted your Lego to stay together and your sister broke it, right? So we're looking at what are the feelings and needs. It might even be, if we think about like a need for autonomy, it's like you really wanted to put your shoes on yourself and I did it because we're in a rush and you really didn't want me to do that. Notice how I'm not saying we're in a rush, so you should be okay with it. I'm just saying you really didn't want me to put your shoes on. You wanted to do that yourself. Um, the next thing is we want to use the words that they would use if they were magically mature in this moment. So we're looking here for like a part of what we're doing in this place is giving them the vocabulary to match how they're feeling and what they're needing, and also helping them in that moment where this really intense feeling is coming up. I know I can see how these words match how I'm feeling, right? That helps them to be able to assert like to actually talk rather than get overwhelmed. And so we have one parent saying, my daughter responds to this really well, but I start talking or narrating to my 3-year-old son. It seems like he gets angrier when I speak. We will get to that at maybe the next slide, but we're definitely going to cover that. For a lot of kids, they don't want to talk, and we'll get to that piece. So we're using those words, whatever they would use if they were magically mature. So now I tend to use whatever words I would use regardless of whether they're, what people would consider age appropriate. You don't have to do that. You can use the 3-year-old, the 4-year-old, the 5-year-old, like ways of expressing things. But what we're looking for is like helping them to see it's like, this is how you're feeling and needing. These are the words that match how that feels. That helps them to feel validated, but also, as I said, it gives them the chance to build the vocabulary and also build the connection between these words match these feelings and these needs. So your tone of voice is low, slow, calm, and quiet. The vibe we're creating is this is important. I'm here with you. And even though this is intense, we are safe, right? This is where that tone of voice issue, we're getting really down into low, slow, calm, and quiet, right? The more we can do this, it helps them regulate just from being able to hear somebody being regulated. It also helps them to have the signal that this is okay. Like, it's not okay that you're in overwhelm, but we are going to be able to get through this, right? I am here with you. I'm going to take care of you, and we're going to get through this together. Now, and here's that piece I was saying when words aren't helping, right? So whenever you talk, if your child does not like talking at all, or your child doesn't like the amount of words you use. Has happened to me many a time, where I'm just using too many words, right? And it might be that I am not being succinct in what I'm saying, or it might be that I'm talking more than what they can cope with in the state of dysregulation they're in. Whatever the issue is, we know that silence still helps, right? Stay in the sweet spot. So that physical spot where you're close enough that they know that you're there to help them, but you're far enough that you're not agitating them physically. We want to focus on your body language. So really check in. If you can't talk, really check in with what's going on with your body language. Are you standing like over them? Not that you're intending to stand over them, but they're just so small and we are so tall. Are you standing over them, or are you down low? Is there any tension in your body? Is there any signal that you're giving them to say that that this isn't a safe situation? We want to really look at that body language and your facial expression as well. We want to keep your thoughts on the same vibe, right? This is important. I'm here and we're safe. I run the sentences through in my mind when this happens. So I'm thinking what I would say out loud if it was okay for me to talk. Part of what that does is really attunes my body language because I'm thinking about like what's happening, what I would be saying. Part of that issue as well is it keeps me focused. So I'm less likely to get dysregulated, and it keeps me from getting distracted or frustrated that this is taking so long. And the last thing it does for you is it gives you practice, right? You're practicing talking through. And then for some kids, there'll come a time in the tantrum that they are willing to talk even before they've gotten back to regulation. For other kids, we just can't talk until they're back to regulated. But for some, once they've had a little bit of space and a little bit of time, they are okay with us talking. Another thing that can happen with a kid who's not wanting you to talk, sometimes it's that what you're saying isn't landing. So what you're saying, the words you're using just aren't resonating for them, or which is the thing that always happens to me, using too many words, right? Or, you're saying something that doesn't match. You might be trying to narrate their feelings, but you're not actually as accurate as you need to be. So you might be saying frustrated. There was one example when my now 10-year-old was, I can't remember how old she was. I want to say 2 or 3. And I said to her, she looked so angry. And I said, "Oh, sweetie, you're so angry." And she says, "I'm not angry. I just Sarah." Now, I will never know whether she felt angry and she couldn't match the word angry to how she felt, or whether actually that wasn't the feeling she was having, right? And that feeling just to me looks like anger, but it wasn't how she was feeling, right? And you can see how sometimes when you're talking, it is that we're not actually resonating with how they're feeling, or it's just not landing. That when you're being silent and running through the sentences, it gives you a chance to really think, well, is this, like, what signs do I have that my guesses are potentially accurate or not accurate, right? We keep, even if you're not talking, just being there still helps them to regulate. So how long do we do this? We do it until they calm, that you're both clear on what they need, right? So you know, and they know what it is that they're actually needing, what's underneath the tantrum, not necessarily the thing that's at the surface, but what's underlying that. And it's important here that it's not about whether you understand, but whether they feel held and get clarity and preferably feel understood. Because the biggest issue here is actually their own sense of their emotional self. The biggest issue here is that they know this is why I'm upset. Now, ideally, they'll also feel that you understand them, but it's so much more important that they understand their own feelings than whether you know what it is and then you just sort it out and move on for them. We want them to be building that emotional awareness through the process. Or, right, so you're going to do it until those things happen, or you can't help any longer because you're too emotional or you're out of time, right? There are going to be times, particularly when you're learning, but even when you're very experienced at this and it's really easy for you, there are going to be times where you just don't have the emotional capacity, right? It might be that you're having a really hard day. Maybe you haven't slept because you have a newborn as well. Maybe, who knows? There's going to be times where you just don't have the emotional space. And there are also going to be times when you're out of time. No matter how good you get at this, there's going to be times where they tantrum at a time when you just don't have the time to be able to help. And in that case, we want to, if you can say this, we want you to say, I can see you're upset and I want to help you, but I am fill in the blank, tired, busy, frustrated, and I can't help you right now. Right. So we're validating that they're allowed to be upset. And we're reassuring them that we want to help, but at this moment we can't, right? And so then that's setting the scene for it's also going to be okay if they're overwhelmed and we don't help. We're setting the scene for it's really important that I help you, but at this moment I just don't have the capacity, right? We're not making it out like it's the fact that their emotions are too much, right? We're not making it out like they shouldn't feel this way, or they're being a problem. We're just saying that. Now, there will be times where you're so emotionally spent that you won't even be able to say this, and that's okay too. When you have the capacity, we want to say this in the moment. And if you can't say it in the moment, we want to say it after the fact. So whether it's everyone calms down, or let's say it's, as one parent was saying, morning times are always fun. It's like, exactly, right? You've got so much time pressure. It's really, really hard. So let's say you're doing a morning drop off. You can't say something along these lines in the moment. When you see them in the afternoon or the evening, come back and say that, sweetie, when you were upset this morning, I really wanted to help, but I was so worried about being late that I just couldn't help you. I'm so sorry about that, right? It's still helpful and valid for them to hear it after the fact. Um, I love this comment. So one parent has said, you've touched on this, but I know in an ideal world we wouldn't be rushing, but I find that overwhelms can happen at times where we need to go somewhere, right? And so this is where, and do we have any tips? Absolutely. So if your child is only tantruming at times when these things happen, then what we want to do is look at, after the fact, looking at what could have solved the problem, right? We're going to go through the problem solving in a few minutes, but if you can, after the fact, go through, oh, so this morning when we needed to get to school on time and you were really upset, what was that about? What were the feelings? What were the needs? What could we have done if we had time? Right? The more we do that, the more your child doesn't have the sense that my needs being unmet is an emergency, because they can see that we're actively working to figure out ways to make it better. But also, the vast majority of times, it's actually a solvable problem. We just don't have we're not practiced enough to find the solution in that moment. And sometimes we really can't, like it's just such a time pressure that we can't. But we're looking for what are the solutions. So often, once we've got the day-to-day ways to get their needs met in place, the tantrums just don't happen as often, right? So when we come to the do-over slide, this will be really, really important for you. So the signal will come back. So if you have helped them to regulate, they've calmed down, but what will happen if we don't resolve the underlying need, the signal will continue coming on. So that feeling your child's having will come back if we don't resolve the underlying need, right? And this is the thing where some people will say, like, it's, you know, I validate the feeling, but like, then what? This is exactly what that issue is. Because if we validate the feeling, but we don't do anything to resolve the need underneath the feeling, it doesn't get you anywhere, right? You see so many people saying I validated the feeling, but then it didn't, we didn't resolve anything, right? It just felt like it just kept going. That's the issue. So the more you help them calm down from the overwhelm, the fewer signals they have in the bed, right? So if you've got less unresolved emotions, then you've got more capacity. So even if something goes really badly wrong in the afternoon, right? If you've handled all the tantrums that happened earlier that day in a way that helps them to regulate and resolve the underlying needs, then when that frustrating thing happens in the afternoon, they're less likely to get overwhelmed. Or if they do get overwhelmed, it's a shorter experience or it's less intense, right? Now, to stop the overwhelm, we have to identify and meet the underlying need, right? So if we can't meet the need, so sometimes we just can't, the vast majority of times it is feasible that we'd be able to meet the need. But as I said, we're not practiced at recognizing what the need is, or we're not practiced at finding a realistic solution. So not something that requires you to have more privilege than you do, not something that requires everything to be going right on the day, but practice to figure out what's that underlying need and how do we find a solution. Until we get back to really clever at that, there's going to be times that you can't meet the need. And so what we want to do there is reinforce that the need is important and we would solve it if we could. So for example, I want to put my own seatbelt on, but it takes 27 minutes and we're late for school, then late for daycare would probably be the age for that. Then we'll be like, sweetie, I'm so sorry. You really want to do it yourself because you love to do it yourself. I had to put the seatbelt on because we were going to be late. And so you can see how it's like, I want you to have the chance to do it yourself. It's just that I have a situation that I can't do that. So then we move on to problem solving. So once they feel heard on their needs, we're looking for options to meet the need that work for both of you, right? And that like if there's more than two of you at the time, so if there's siblings or the other parent or their teacher at school or whoever it is, we want to look for options that work for everybody. So this is not about if I'm overwhelmed, everybody has to meet my needs and to heck with everybody else. We're really looking for solutions that work for everybody. So if there's anything that you can't agree to, tell them the reason, the real reason. So often, because we've all been conditioned in this culture, so often the reasons we give for not being able to do things are things that are actually not real. So as I'm just trying to think of a good example. So if your child, let's say that your child wants to have ice cream for dinner, right? You might say ice cream is not for dinner, right? But it's not necessarily true because some people would eat ice cream for dinner. And also there might be an ice cream that's made out of something that's actually healthy, right? So we're looking for what's the real reason. We're not having ice cream for dinner tonight because I need you to get the things that are important for your body out of your dinner. So I need you to have fiber or protein or whatever the things are, and like age appropriate so they understand it. But we're looking for that real reason for why they can't have what they need. And a parent has just said, you've been having a day. I'm so sorry. I've just joined and wondering if there would be a replay. Yes, I will send the email out later tonight with the replay and some email reminders to watch it. So you'll be able to catch up, and feel free to send through any questions that you have about the content that you missed. Feel free to email them through. So we need to in terms of practicing, this all takes time because particularly identifying the needs and problem solving, these are things that we are not commonly doing in our culture. So we're not commonly working out ways that work for everybody. Commonly, what happens is the person who has the power gets to decide, and the other person is supposed to be what they say, resilient. But what they really mean is they're supposed to be able to acquiesce and be comfortable with acquiescing, right? That's how everything works. It's not just about our families with small children. This is how it works at school. It's how it works in the workplace. It's how it works in many friendships because we're all bathing in this culture where ultimately it's about, like, if you're a kind person, you'll be a giver, you'll acquiesce. If you are a selfish person or you're a person who has power and is not conscious of how you're using that power, you get to be the one who decides, and you make the best decision you can if you are a person who cares. But we really don't spend a lot of time really figuring out solutions that work for everybody involved. That being the case, we do need to practice this. It's not going to be something that you just watch at once and then everything's fine tomorrow, unless there was just like one piece of this that you were missing. Really, it's not going to be easy the first time you do it. So as you practice, don't push yourself to help when you are rushed or when you don't have the emotional capacity. So if you do that, you're going to get frustrated, you're not going to be as attuned, and you're going to feel like it doesn't work. And yes, that means if your mornings are always rushed, that means you're going to be focused more on the do-overs when we get to that part than you are on what happens in the moment. And that will still get you there, right? You'll get there faster if you do what you have the capacity to do and make the incremental changes than if you try to do it when you just don't have the capacity to do it. Now, if you never feel like trying to help, chances are there's a bigger priority going on, or you have some baggage that's in the way. So, for example, if you have an enormous amount of financial pressure, which is quite common these days because of the way the way the economy runs, you may not ever feel like you have the emotional space to be able to do that. And so if there's really no time, it's not just that there's not time at the right times, there's just really no time. I want you to have, like, really give yourself permission to accept that this is not fair on you. It's not fair for you to have to be parenting in these circumstances. And also remember what I said at the beginning, for some of the parents who don't have the time and space to do this, it's never too late. Absolutely, the younger they are, the easier it is, but it is absolutely never too late to do this. And so if we need to wait until you're in a situation where you have more space and emotional capacity, then we'll just wait until that time and we'll do it then. Now, sometimes if there's baggage in the way, it can be things like we are not getting space held for ourselves. I'm just going to need to take a little bit of a drink. I talk so much in these things that I end up with a dry throat. So if we're not getting space held for ourselves, it can be that we end up really struggling when our children, like what we perceive to be really demanding, that like everything has to stop because they're upset. Right? That can be really tricky. We can work through that. For some people, it's working with somebody like me who is a coach. For other people, it's working with a therapist, right, to work through some of that baggage. But even if that's the case, we go back to, we're going to get there when you have the capacity, and we're going to, whether that's now or later, when you can is the best time, not when you feel like you should. And so just let yourself try when you can, right? Create the space. Incremental change makes an enormous difference over time. So the do-over slide that I have referenced a number of times already is when things don't go to plan. So you're trying it out for the first couple of times, or you're very experienced at it and something goes wrong and all the wheels fall off and it's just really not fun. We want to review specifically which moment you wish had gone differently. So we don't want to just say, my child tantrumed, I tried to help, it didn't work, I ended up yelling, it was horrible. I just shouldn't yell, right? That is not going to help you build the neural connections to improve your likelihood of doing it a better way next time, right? What really helps is when we look at a specific moment. So let's say in that example, you tried to help when actually you didn't have the space to help. Or let's say you tried to help, you were doing really well, but it just kept going on and on and on. And there just came a time when your emotions just started coming up yourself and you couldn't manage that. Right. Either way, you choose the moment when you wish it had gone differently. And I want you to imagine in great detail what you wish you had done. So the words you wish you had used, the body language you wish you had used, the what you would have physically done or decisions you would have made differently, whatever the thing is, we want to imagine in great detail. So the specific words or the specific things about your body language, imagine those. This trains your brain to be able to do it just as well as if you'd practiced in real time. Because what it does is it helps you to think of what, like, you're coming up with what the response that would have been helpful is, and you're just building those neural connections. So the more often, so if it's a specific example, the next time that specific example comes up, you've got, an example that you've thought of how to respond. But even if it's a completely different tantrum tomorrow, your brain has practiced figuring it out. And the practicing of the figuring it out is building neural connections as well. We really want to do that do-over. So that will be really important for the parent whose child is only tantruming at school. Doing those do-overs, in this case, what you're looking at with your child is what happened at school today. When did you start to get upset? Like, what could have been differently? What could we have said or done? What help did you need? Like, we're really looking at those do-overs. Also the case for the parent who said that mornings are always a rush. So mornings are always fun. And the parent who said it often happens when we're rushing to get somewhere that we have to be there on time. These do-overs is how we get to a place where we are practicing how to do it in the moment. And also, if you talk to your child about the do-over, then they also get the experience of, here's how I wish I had responded to you, right? So that builds their neural connections as well. So can you see that we're not trying to make your child have a less intense response to their feelings? What we're trying to do is find the root cause of the feeling and then solving that in a way that works for everybody, right? So then that they do have a less intense response, but not because we're controlling it, but because we're resolving it. And then that that takes a number of different skills, right? Particularly identifying the needs, not always easy if you've grown up in this culture. And particularly problem solving, again, not always easy. We're usually so ingrained in it would just be quicker if you do it this way, or we just should do it this way. That's just the way it goes, right? That's the kind of culture that we live in. And so then it becomes quite difficult for us to really build the skill to problem solve, particularly problem solving in the moment. These are skills we need to develop over time, and none of these skills are common in our culture. So now I'm going to talk about how I could give you some additional support on the back of this webinar. If you're not interested in that support, or you know that it's not an option for you right now, you do not need to stay and watch it. The only thing that will happen after this, I'm not going to go through any more content, but we will do a question and answer session at the end of this. If you wanted to jump off now, you will have access to the question and answer period as well on the recording. So if you don't feel like you want to listen to this, feel free. You don't have to stay. But if you are potentially interested in some support, I recommend for this situation that we do 4 45-minute sessions together. And in that time, what we can do is refine your skills to hold space so that your child regulates more quickly and you can do it really effectively, right? So what I'm talking about there is we find what are the words that work for your child, or what's the body language that works. We're working on what helps your child to get out of the overwhelm and into the space where they can talk about it. so that then you can move into the problem solving space, right? So the quicker we can get through that process, the easier it is on both of you. The next thing we can do is identify the most common needs underneath your child's tantrums. So for most people, not just children, but for most people, there's only a small number of needs that are either the most important to us and or the ones that we are most persistently not getting met. And though, like, once we identify those, we can, like, just a couple between 1 and 3 of those needs. Once we identify what they are, we can find ways to get those needs met more consistently. And all of a sudden, we have so many fewer tantrums. The problem solving piece is also one that I find a lot of parents need support with. So finding ways to meet those needs that are actually realistic for your individual circumstances. So, like, not things that require you to have more money than you have, not things that require you to have more time or more emotional regulation in your own self, right? We want to look for ways that actually work in your individual circumstances for everybody involved to get their needs met. This is the piece where there's not a script you can say of when children are both wanting to play with one toy. There's not a script that works for every situation, right? It's not a script that works for every sibling relationship or every situation that they're in. This is about finding those ways to meet those needs. That's something that I have a lot of experience with, of helping parents to see the forest for the trees, and also coming up with solutions. Because I've got 9 years of experience doing this with families, being able to come up with an option that works is something that I'm really focused on. And the last one is to build your own ability to stay regulated while you help your child. So for some parents, once we build the skills to help them regulate, your own regulation is much, much better, because you're not feeling like this, I can't help, and this is not getting any better. And the dysregulating effect of listening to somebody tantrum, right, that is far less. So then your own regulation is fine. But for some parents, it's actually really tricky, either in the learning phase or even once their skills are refined. Their own regulation is still something that we need to build some skills around, and I can help you with that. So this package of 4 45-minute sessions is 197 Australian dollars at the moment. And you can purchase that at the link jodithornton.com/4, which I've just popped in the chat box for you as well. So in terms of my approach, when we work together, I've already said this, but it's so important to know there's always another way. So if there's something that doesn't work for you because of your circumstances, or there's something that works when your partner isn't home but not when they are home, or there's something that doesn't work because your child has 2 houses and your ex handles it in a completely different way, I will find a way. So I was a strong-willed child who grew up to be a strong-willed parent coach. And so I am determined to find a way. And I've got so much experience now in helping parents with this that I will, we may or may not get there in the first session, but we will find a way to get the goal that you're looking for that is realistic and workable for you. Now, you don't even need to tell me why you don't want to do something. If you can share it, that's helpful, because often it will help me to find the way that will work. But if you don't even want to tell me why something that I suggest is not going to work for you, you do not even have to share. I will find another way. If you struggle to regulate yourself, this is something that I can really help with. So one of my focal points when I work with parents is figuring out, like, where is the emotional awareness for yourself about noticing the feelings before they get so overwhelming for you, and coming up with a realistic way to manage that in the moment. This is something that we can do in those 4 sessions together. Now, if your partner or ex, whichever parents are in your child's life, if they are enthusiastic about doing this, then by all means, let's do it together. So the 2 of you and me working together. If the other adult is anything less than enthusiastic, it is much better for you to do this on your own, and then we can work on what we're going to do about the balancing what needs to happen with the other adult. because if they are not enthusiastic, chances are they have different baggage to yours. And so then my approach will shift. And if we try to do this together, when you have different needs about how we approach, particularly like tantrums, but anything in parenting, if we try and do the same approach, the other adult is not going to be as committed. They're not going to be as open. They're going to be frustrated, and they're going to be skeptical. And so what I recommend, if the other adult is open but not enthusiastic, we can talk about that. Definitely send me an email and let me know, like, this is what's going on. In a lot of cases, I have worked with each adult separately. So I do 4 sessions with the adult that is more gentle or responsive focused, and 4 sessions separately with the adult who is more, you know, we don't want to get too carried away with feelings, and children, need us not to be so soft with them. I will help them. We'll get to the same outcome, but I'll help them with a different path, and so that it will work for them, right? So if your partner's enthusiastic, then yes, do it together. If they're not enthusiastic, let's have a chat. Either do it on your own or do it. I help both of you, but separately. I also have zero judgment. And a lot of people say zero judgment, they don't really mean zero judgment. I know that if I knew the full story of what contributed to where you're up to, like how things are for you now, I would have no judgment. And I am at the point now that I don't actually need you to tell me the story of why you feel the way you feel, or why you behave the way you've behaved, or why your family is in the situation that they're in. Like, I really just don't judge. And so I think that's so important, because you are able to be as open as you want to be with me. That does not mean you have to share everything. But as much as you want to share, you do not have to worry about the reaction that I will have, because I am truly not judgmental of any people at all. I'm also really efficient at this because I've got 9 years of experience. So I've helped parents with different childhoods that they've had themselves. I've helped parents who are in blended families and single parent households and high conflict X situations. And, I've helped children who are parents of children who are older than I am. Like, I've got so much experience that usually, particularly if we use the example of figuring out what your child's underlying need is, usually I can get it from the description you give me of like what is going on. If I can't get it from that, I can give you a couple of things to try. And based on the reaction we get from those strategies, then we'll be able to get there, right? It's that level of experience I have means that we cut through the trial and error much more quickly. So we talk about outcomes, like what's going to happen. For the vast majority of kids, they'll have significantly fewer tantrums. Significantly. Now, some kids, that means 0 tantrums, right? Once we do this process together, they're not actually getting overwhelmed anymore. For some kids, it's just from time to time, but it's easier for you to manage because it's not happening so consistently. But in the trickiest of situations, we only make an incremental shift. So if we've got a really tricky situation where, you've actually, I won't go through the particular examples because it really depends on the situation. But in the trickiest of situations, we're making an incremental shift. But the feedback I get from parents in this situation is that because the situation is so tricky, even just making that incremental shift is such a relief that it's worth it, right? And so I believe that in any case, you will feel significantly better about the situation. Once you're tantruming child or children, if there's multiple of them that are in this space, there's more space for everyone else in the family, right? We're not all having to spend time and energy on the child who gets more overwhelmed more often. But there's also less self-criticism, judgment, shame, guilt, and worry of your own self, right? So often when we're having a child who's tantruming a lot, we feel uncomfortable about how we're responding. We can doubt whether it's our fault, even if we kind of know that's not true. You can hear it from other people. It can be hard to stay strong on the fact that it's definitely not because of you that your child is tantruming. Once you know how to regulate them, like all those feelings can dissipate or potentially just go away completely. This is one that's so important to me, is that once you see a big shift because you are skillful, you will have more confidence that you are capable of bridging the gap between how you want to parent and how you do parent, not only on the best days, but day in and day out. Like that is such a big shift in how you see yourself and how you experience parenting, and also how much space you have to be thinking about deepening your relationship with your child, or even just being your own person outside of parenting. Like this is important for your kids too, right? For you to not be consumed with how hard things are day to day, is to actually have your own space to be your own person. For the tantruming kids, it creates space for them to practice being assertive, right? Because if they're not spending so much time in overwhelm when things are hard, they can actually start to learn how to be assertive. Create space for them to practice solving problems. My favorite example of this is actually my now 12-year-old. She was so tiny when this happened. I want to say 2.5. But I was one of those days where I just really wanted to do the dishes, and it wasn't important, but it's so important. And she was banging something on the coffee table, and the thing she was banging was not precious, and the coffee table was horrendous. It needed to go to the tip. So it wasn't about that. It was about the noise. And so what I said to her was, "Sweetie, can you please be quiet? It's hurting my ears." And what she said to me was, "No, mummy, I like to bang. You get headphones." Right now, some people think that that's being bossy, whereas I was like, that solves both of our problems. I got my headphones, I did the dishes, she kept banging, everybody was happy, right? When they have the space to practice problem solving, they can come up with solutions without us even needing to be part of the process. And that's really important. That problem solving piece, the skills to problem solve, is the key to them not being demanding or people pleasing, right? Is actually looking for solutions. It also gives them the space to not take on messages from other people that give them about their feelings being too much or just wrong, and gives them the trust that you can handle their big feelings no matter how overwhelming. For you, it helps you to deeply believe in your parenting approach and your skills to deliver on that approach, right? So it's not just about how you want to parent, but it's how you do parent. You can stop worrying about the messages that they're getting from other people about their feelings, because you know your child is on the way to regulating and understanding their own feelings. So when other people, say invalidating things, it just doesn't have the same amount of impact. And then you can stop trying to control people who just don't get it. Absolutely, we want to advocate for our children, but some people are just not at the point at which they're ready to understand this. And you don't have to constantly manage them if you know your child is on their own path to understanding their feelings with your assistance. You get to enjoy more time with your child, and you get to relax, right? Like maybe finish a whole cup of tea before it goes cold, because you don't have to be constantly focused on managing everybody's emotions. It also gives you the space to start helping your child build that independent skill set so they can do it when you're not there, whether the adult they're with is gentle or not. So important for the times where you and your partner or their other parent who they also live with don't see eye to eye. Building that independent skill set is so critical for that. And also things like at school, where they're not necessarily, like when you're a teacher with so many kids to look after, you don't necessarily have the time to help a child to regulate all the time, because you've got so many other kids in the room, right? There's so many situations, or being with grandparents or aunts and uncles, like there's so many situations where their independent skill set is so important. So if you wanted to do that package together, that's the 4 45-minute session package. If you wanted to do that together, you can purchase that at jodithornton.com/4. you have any questions, or I'm going to go through the chat of the questions that have already come through, then feel free to ask more. And you're also welcome to email me if you have any other details. Okay, so we come back to another question. So my 4-year-old likes to put blankets or towels on the ground. If she can't get them perfectly flat or straight, she has a meltdown. She also has to put her cup plate toys in perfect positions or spots together on the bench. And if I move them, she has a meltdown. Is this normal toddler behavior, or is something else going on? And what can I do to stop or lessen the tantrums? And someone else has replied, look into possible neurodivergence. Absolutely true. And yes, it is possible that it's a neurodivergence. There are also other reasons why a child might want that level of control. So we look at things like they're going through a lot of change. It could also be, so I think you said the age 4 years old. If you could let me know, are they about 6 months from their birthday, or are they closer to 4 or closer to 5? There's a developmental stage that happens at 4.5, which sometimes can make everything just more overwhelming than normal. And that could be the case as well. So how old are they? And also how long has it been going on? And there are other reasons why they might want everything to be perfect. Everything has to be lined up exactly the way it is. So the steps that we did tonight will really help. I would also add that separately to helping with the regulation in the moment is talking to them about why it's important, right? What goes wrong if the towels aren't exactly the way they want them to be? It's much easier for them to talk about that when it's not happening at the moment. So when everybody's calm and regulated, talking about, oh, hey, when we were playing with the towels this morning, seemed really important to you that they were perfectly the way you wanted them to be. Can you tell me about why? Right. And so what we're looking for is building their own awareness and looking for what's the underlying situation. So absolutely could be a neurodivergence, but also could be that is potentially a neurotypical response to an unmet need as well. Then the next parent has said, my son won't give me space when I need it, so I find it hard to regulate myself. Any tips if you cannot get physical space? Yes. So depending on how old your son is, we want to build their capacity to give you space. So doing the do-over, but asking them, so sweetie, when I was really upset, tell me, like, what was hard about giving me some space? Could you have gone to sit on the couch, but like not right next to me, like not so we're touching? Would that have worked for you? And it doesn't have to be that specific example, but you're looking for talking about why is it hard. We definitely want to improve their capacity to give you space. Now, for some kids, if you're dysregulated, they will find it impossible to give you space because they're dysregulated about the fact that you're dysregulated. In which case, what we want to look for is what helps you to be regulated. I'll actually stop sharing and turn my video on. Sorry, they've moved the things on Zoom recently, and now, here we go, I found it. So one of the things we want to look for is what helps you to regulate in those moments. So when my now 12-year-old was about 2 and I had this issue, for me, if I could imagine going inside of myself and actually like almost like emotionally withdrawing, but physically she was still touching me, that was okay for me, right? That's not going to work for everybody, but what we're looking for is something that does work for you. For some parents, it'll be things like using headphones to either noise cancelling or particular sounds that work. So for some people, it's literally heavy metal music. For some people, it's classical music. For some people, it's the sound of the ocean, right? We're looking for what works for you. And so that would be trying some things as well. But definitely we want to work on, depending on how old your son is, we want to be working on it anyway, but the younger your son is, the more we'll have to work with the fact that he can't give you space. The older he is, the more chance we have that he'll be able to learn to give you space when you're upset. So a parent is asking, is your approach similar to tuning into kids? I've heard of that program before, but I haven't looked into it. I'm just going to write down your name and I'm going to look into what tuning into kids, what strategies they use, and I will email you to let you know if there's similarities and differences there. And a parent said, "Thank you so much. You're so welcome. It's so good to have you here." So I have a 4-year-old girl, and she gets upset over nothing at times, and I can't get her to calm down. And I get overwhelmed. Is this normal? Absolutely. We want to reframe. It's never over nothing, right? So it appears to be over nothing, right? So it can appear to be something very small, but it's actually something that is really, it's either big to her or it's the last drop in the bucket that overflows, right? Or alternatively, it is something that's like, say, for example, this is if we look at, imagine she's been at daycare all day. When she comes home, she's got all this pent up emotion that she couldn't process at school. And now it comes out either just out of nowhere or it comes out over something that appears to be much smaller than the reaction that she's having, right? This is the we want to always recognize that there is always a reason. It's never nothing, right? And so our first thing is to do exactly the same as what we talked about tonight. So number one, keep her safe. Number two, get to the sweet spot, relax your body language, reflect, right? And in this case, if it appears to be over nothing, you might say, "Oh, sweetie, you seem so upset, but I'm not sure what's happened," right? That we're still validating the upset. We're just acknowledging that we're not sure. That even just going through that validation might give you a chance to think about what could it be, right? You may be able to pick up some clues, but even if you've got zero clues, the more we talk to her, validate the feeling and use your body language, your tone of voice, or being quiet if she prefers silence, the more you do that, the more it will help her to regulate. And then she will be able to practice over time, being able to articulate to you what it was that happened. The do-overs will be important as well. Absolutely. And you said, is this normal? I think I said yes, it's absolutely normal. And use the strategies we talked through tonight. That will be useful for you. The girl who's putting the towels flat turned 4 in May. That's she's so much closer to 4. I would say it's not the developmental stage, so it still could be, and there could be a need there that's going on, or if she's gone through a lot of change, also might be that neurodivergence aspect. But either way, the approaches we talk through tonight will be helpful. So when you have a child who's potentially on the spectrum, for a start, a lot of people can't get access to assessments. Either the child is too young, or the system is like you have to wait a long time, or it requires you to pay and you're not in a position to do so. So in that case, you definitely want to be building up these emotional skill sets because you're waiting for that support that should be easily accessible, but in so many places around the world, it's just not easily accessible. But even if they are, it is a neurodivergence that is underlying needing everything to be lined up or needing everything to be just perfect, what we talked about tonight will help. Won't be as helpful as wraparound support that some children who are neurodivergent deserve and need. But these approaches will help your child to an extent, and it will definitely help you to stay regulated while it's happening. It's going on a few months, so if it's only a few months, I'd probably be less inclined to say it's a neurodivergence, but still could be true at 4 if it's only been happening a few months. I would be thinking about, is there something that happened at the time, around about the time it started? So all sorts of things. Did you move house? Did a change in the family structure happen? Did they get a new sibling? Or did the sibling, the baby, even like when the baby becomes mobile, all of a sudden they're like a person rather than an inanimate object, and then that can disrupt them? all sorts of things that could be, but still taking the approaches we talked through tonight will be helpful. But if you can think about what was happening at around about the time that this started happening, that can give you some clues. Yes, so a parent was saying he possibly autistic, and he does rely on my nervous system. These strategies really help with your nervous system. You may also need some support around your own regulation, but these strategies, even if you do this on its own, it will still definitely help. Thank you. You're so welcome. So my daughter is 6. At school, she uses noise cancelling headphones to manage emotions. That's brilliant. We didn't have that when I was at school, and I'm so glad that your daughter has access to that. I don't want her to depend on them. How can I help her? So what we're looking for here is building up her emotional awareness so that she can see the feelings are coming up before they get so overwhelming that she needs the headphones. So for some kids, that's a very small window. For other kids, it builds up over time, and we've got time to take action before they get overwhelmed, right? Either way, we want to build her skills to notice when the feelings are coming up. What we're looking for is, what is the root cause? For some kids, particularly a kid who is noise cancelling headphones are effective, it can just be that the school situation is overstimulating for them, right? And that is not their fault, right? The school, for many of us, the schools are as flexible as they can be, but they're not flexible enough to meet the needs of all kids. And if your child is that is just too stimulating for her, it is better for her to have the noise cancelling headphones and not learn to dismiss or repress her feelings. Far better outcome for her. If it's not, just like the nature of the environment is just too much. Let's say, for example, she's okay until I'm just going to make up a silly example, but let's say she's able to manage her emotions until all the kids on the table want to use her pencils and she doesn't want to share. That's a solvable problem, right? And if the more we teach her to be able to solve that problem, so identify what's important to her, be curious about what's important to the other kids, and find a solution that works for everybody, the less she'll get overwhelmed, the less she needs the headphones, right? That's the piece where we really want to be looking at, is like, what is her level of emotional awareness and what are the problems that we can solve? And if the problems are unsolvable just through nature of the circumstances, definitely it's not a problem to be dependent on the noise cancelling headphones, right? What we want to do then is help her to not over rely on them in situations where she doesn't need them, right? If the schoolroom is the classroom is just so overwhelming for her, we want to make sure that, yes, she uses them in school, but she doesn't also use them in the afternoon when she's having a disagreement with her sibling. We want to use problem solving in that case, right? Thank you. You're so welcome. Another thank you. You're so welcome. I'm trying to teach my daughter healthy ways for expressing how she feels, i.e., when frustrated, to take a breath. So for many of us, being told to take a breath is like saying, like, the problem, don't worry about your feelings, worry about how you're reacting, right? And so when she's frustrated, it can be quicker to help her express the frustration in her words. So let's say she's frustrated that you've told her no more biscuits this afternoon, right? I'm just making up 3 examples. When she gets frustrated and does the thing that she gets frustrated about, right? What we want to do is say, you're so frustrated that there's no more biscuits, right? Give her the words and then possibly help her with the regulation, depending on how much it's about expression and how much it's about regulation. But give her those words so that she can express herself assertively, but kindly, right? That's where we want to get to for the expression. Sometimes taking a breath is helpful for some people, but for many people, it feels like put a lid on your emotions, which is going to feel like repression. It's going to feel like you're telling her emotions are not okay, right? So I wouldn't necessarily say never say take a breath, but if you know taking a breath doesn't work for her, work more on the expression, so the articulation of how she feels, rather than on the, like, what I would call like a coping mechanism. If she can, if taking a breath helps her to gather her thoughts, by all means, that's perfect. Another thank you. You're so welcome. At this moment, I don't have another date planned for this webinar. I'm thinking about what my next one will be, but there will be a video recording that comes out on email in a couple of hours' time. And once I've decided what the next one is, I'll send it through on email. Is it to teach skills to improve emotions? Yes. So the skills we want to look at, I'm just double checking that. Yes, so it's healthy ways of expressing herself. So the skills we're teaching in order to get to that place is awareness of when the feelings happen before they get overwhelmed. Two is the vocabulary to be able to express the frustration. And three, we have to get the problem solving to happen, because if we don't get the problem solving to happen, the frustration just keeps coming back and back and back, or it gets bigger and bigger and bigger. Alternatively, they start pushing the feelings down, right? Those are the only options. So we need to get, so that problem solving skill set is just as important as the others, right? Those are the skills that we want to work on to help her to healthily express herself when she's frustrated. Another thank you. I'm so glad you found it great. And yes, there will be, and you'll get an email once a week with my updates. And I'll also let you know if I have other webinars coming through as well. Any tips for getting dressed in the morning? She will only wear dresses at the moment. So can you share a little bit about what she finds hard with getting dressed? And is it, when you say she'll only wear dresses, is that an issue because you are in the Southern Hemisphere and it's freezing at the moment? Or is it she's not allowed to wear dresses where she's going? Like, can you share a little bit more about the difficulty there? Now, and everyone else who's still here, feel free to pop in any questions in the chat that you would like to. I'll stay here until we've answered everybody's questions. I think it's the control side of things from her. Yeah. So what we're looking for is, so control can be a symptom. Control can be a coping mechanism for any other underlying need being unmet, right? So when it's control, we want to look for two things. One, is it something underneath that is not met, and the control is the coping mechanism? Or is the control that she really wants things to be done the way she wants them? And then the question becomes why, right? Why is it that she wants it to be that way? So asking her, what does she need? And then sometimes, oh yes, so great. So we have a lot of pants I'd love her to wear and not ruin the dresses at daycare. So this is perfect, right? Because from her perspective, she is thinking, what difference does it make if I ruin the dresses? Now, she may think, of course, I won't ruin the dresses, which may or may not be realistic. She, at the daycare age, their ability to connect, the consequences of decisions is still developing. She also may be thinking, they won't get ruined, or what difference does it make if they get ruined, right? So we want to give her the reasons, right? It could be that when you're at daycare, you like to do lots of activities, and I'm going to make examples up. It's like, you do lots of painting and climbing and playing in the sand pit. So then your dresses get, the word ruined is not as descriptive as a child might need it to be. So then your dresses get dirty, or then your dresses get ripped, or then your dresses get worn. So then they're not as pretty anymore. And then we need to still go, why does that matter? Right? Because you get really sad when your favorite dresses aren't pretty anymore, if that's true. Or it's important for me that we keep some of the dresses really nice, or all of the dresses, whatever's true for you. It's important to me that we keep your dresses really nice and clean and not worn down, because I want you to be able to wear those when we go to dinner at Nan and Granddad's, or, you know, I'm just making up examples, right? I want to give her the real reasons, because we have a lot of pants I would like her to wear, not descriptive enough for her as to why it's important, right? Is it about temperature? Is it about you want to keep the dresses nice? Is it about like all of those kinds of all those things? Like, what is the truth about why you want her to do it? And then when we come back to, so let's say I'll pick an example. You want to keep the dresses nice because you want to have nice things to wear out. And that's not okay for her, right? If she says, that's not something that's important to me, then what we're looking for is, what is the other solution? Why are the dresses important to her? And if there isn't a solution, because as I said, sometimes it's literally not, because one solution might be like, she can wear some of the dresses, not all the dresses. That might not be okay with you. I don't want you to acquiesce just because it's an option. If it's not okay with you, we want to come back to, what's the best decision we can make in the moment, right? So I can't let you wear the dresses, but what is it that like, what could make it a little bit easier to wear pants today? Do you want to choose the pants? Do you, blah, blah, blah. We'll go through it. And yeah, see, maybe it's me trying to regain control as well. Exactly, right? Once you start to recognize, why is it that it's important to me, all of a sudden we open up more options. So an example from when Alyssa would have been 2, because I was pregnant at the time. There was a time where we were coming home from somewhere in the car, and she just wanted to play inside the car. And like, they go through that stage where they're just obsessed with being in the car when they're not driving. And this is at the time when I was learning this approach. And I was like, we just need to go inside. And I was like, because, it took me, I don't know how many minutes to realize the reason I wanted to go inside was because it was so cold. And it felt so silly that I didn't realize that I actually had a valid reason for wanting to go inside. Because what I was focused on is, we got home, we should get out of the car and go inside. That's how things should work. I wasn't focused on actually recognizing my own feelings, being assertive, and then problem solving with her. Next day, same thing happens. We get home, and I'm thinking again, like, she doesn't want to come inside. And I'm like, why do I need her to come inside right now? I was like, because I want to sit down. And I was like, well, I can just sit down in the car. Like, it might have made a difference if there was a thing, but it's literally, in that case, I was happy to sit down in the car. I just wasn't thinking that way because I wasn't thinking about problem solving. Beautiful. So next we had, is it for children to know how they feel, to know how to manage themselves? Yes. So depending on how old your child is, we want to be, at all ages and stages, we want to be working towards independent emotional regulation and emotional competency. So that means being able to assert themselves kindly and problem solve in a way that's considerate and like doesn't require them to acquiesce. We always want to be working towards that. Depending on how old your child is how far along we can move to that place. So if your child's 18 months old, we're really just focusing on you holding space for their feelings, right? If your child's 4, absolutely, they have so much capacity to independently manage their emotion. Different kids take different amounts of time to build those skills. And different kids have different levels of skill. So we want to move forward with that. But we absolutely do want all kids to be on the path to independently regulating. Now, and independently being able to be assertive and problem solving. Now, whilst I say we're always on that path, we wouldn't ever require a child to be perfect at it, right? We wouldn't, even if they have the skills and they do it often, they're going to have times that they can't, and that's okay. We're not going to call that a problem. But so many parents are so surprised at how much children can do when they're given the chance to practice the skills rather than being told what is and isn't okay. Do children need quiet time to assist them to learn about how their body feels? They can. So some kids don't need it to be quiet, but it can be helpful. The biggest thing we want to do is help them to recognize what's going on inside their body, because your emotions will cause some kind of physical reaction for you. And it's far easier to notice the physical manifestation of the emotion than it is to recognize the emotion itself. And so it can be quietly body scanning together. It can be when you notice that their emotions have shifted even just a little bit, asking, hey, sweetie, it seems like you're a little bit upset. Where do you feel that in your body? Right? Asking those questions can really help. Is it good to tell children what could you have done differently and manage how you felt instead of sweat? If you are meaning telling children how you could have responded instead of, say, sweating the small stuff, absolutely. It is, it's not necessary, but it can be helpful. What it shows your child is that you are determined to learn about your own reactions. It also shows your children, like, what does it look like to be processing your feelings? Because, to be honest, the vast majority of people don't actually process their feelings. They just push them down. Actually, that's not scientifically accurate. I can't say the vast majority. Many people in our culture don't know how to process their feelings. They either push them down or they let them spill out. But even for people who are actually processing their emotions, most people are doing that on the inside, and that kids can't see that happening. And so by telling them what you could have done differently to manage how you felt, you're showing them, like, what does it look like to process my feelings? Can also help for some personality types of kids, can feel a little bit vulnerable, how we're always talking about their feelings and what they should do differently. We're not talking about ourselves. So it can be a power imbalance. Definitely, I'm not sure if the parent is still here who said that their child might be a PDA child. Definitely there can be a power imbalance in that space that's really important to a child who has PDA. And so that's for people who might not be aware, pathological demand avoidance. And some people say it's better to say persistent demand avoidance, but I think the technical term is pathological. But yes, so it can be helpful to level the playing field as we're talking about our feelings as well. Beautiful. So if anyone has any more questions, we can definitely answer those. But if there's no more questions, I will wrap it up and get the recording to process so that I can send it out to everybody. It's been so wonderful to have you all here. I have so appreciated your comments and your thoughtful questions. Just have one more comment. And thank you so much. You're so welcome. Beautiful. So just one last time, I will pop through that link in case anyone would like to engage that additional support. And it has been so wonderful to have you all here. Thank you so much for your comments and questions. And if you think of anything after we wrap up, feel free to send it through an email. And I'll be so looking forward to anyone who does want to engage in further support. So looking forward to working with you. If you are not looking for additional support or it's not accessible for you at the moment, if you enjoy my email, stay on the email list. You'll still get tips coming through all the time to help you on your journey. And I run this webinar periodically as well. So we'll have this time again at some point. I haven't decided what the next one will be, but I will be running it again at some point in the future as well. Oh, that's totally fine to be late. I know what life is like. Well, life is like just generally, but also with children. And you'll get the recording so you can watch it from the beginning if you get a chance. Thanks, everybody. I'll wrap it up there.